lecture series will be on April 27th. And that's going to be by Hugh King and Ken Cullum about Clinton Hall and Edwards Theater, and I understand they have a cast of thousands. So you won't want to miss that. And I also want to remind you, if you're not already members, I know you're tired of hearing this, but we really depend on our membership. So if you're not already members, there are folders on the very back mantle. You can pick one up. We really value your membership. And your memberships are what allow us to bring these lectures to you free of charge. Our speakers tonight are Jim Brooks and Bill Fleming. Jim I've known my whole life. He's much older than I am, of course, but we've known each other since we were very young. And I think you're going to enjoy Jim. Whatever he has to bring us tonight should be interesting. Bill Fleming has lived here for over 30 years, and although he wasn't born here, he has certainly embraced East Hampton and made it his home. And both Jim and Bill are members of the Historical Society Board of Trustees, and we're so grateful that our trustees are so willing to get up in front and talk to all you people. So we're really looking forward to tonight, and enjoy.
Thank you. I went back there to survey the refreshments in the back, and I asked the ladies if they had any SAMP. But the best they could come up with is Oreo cookies, Richard said. So, Bill and I would like to welcome you all here tonight as we explore place names around East Hampton. We'd like to thank the Historical Society for sponsoring these lectures, and especially Barbara Borsack, who has put so much time and effort in these, and without her, I probably wouldn't be here tonight. I had to lobby very hard to be the first speaker tonight. In fact, I had to beg in some spots because most of you know Bill. And I had to lobby to be the first speaker for the following reasons. Bill, as it turns out, has lived in East Hampton for 32 years. And he keeps asking me, when is he going to be considered a local? I keep telling him, Bill, I have real bad news for you. But you ain't even close.
Over half my life? No.
Now let me put this in perspective, Bill. My grandmother was a Lester. People like Jeanette Edwards Rattray, in her East Hampton genealogy book, describes the Lesters as relative newcomers who have inhabited East Hampton for only 200 years. So many of you sitting here tonight, I know, have a lot more than 200 years. Actually, we're up to 260 now since the book, and I'm looking for acceptance. Secondly, Bill has a vocabulary that most of us can't understand anyway, so I thought I'd speak first. And thirdly, and probably the most important reason, because I knew if I ever handed him the microphone, I would never get it back. It certainly has been a learning experience for me, looking up some of these places and trying to figure out the origins of some of these place names. Because East Hampton can be a very awkward place. It's hard to figure out exactly sometimes where you are. My grandmother Brooks, who lived down in Pantago herself, she was always going up street. She's always going up street. My roots were in the village, and my mother always made me go down street. So between up and down, I had a real hard time. I was born on McGurk Street, brought up on Cooper Lane, and now reside on Sherrill Road. And my good friends point out to me, I've never made it to the right side of the tracks. When I was young, we never ventured below the bridge, North Main Street. And many of my friends who are from that area still refer to me as an upstreeter. I came upon this poem from George Asa Miller that was written in 1926 before a freeman's meeting. A freeman's meeting would be comparable, I guess, to a town board meeting today. And I can just see some of our town board members sitting down to write a poem before their meetings. However, this brings a lot of East Hampton together, and I'd like to read this poem to you if you'd bear with me and just listen to the place names around East Hampton that are referred to. The first Tuesday of April brings remembrances keen of former things, of privilege and right. Hark back with me o'er 50 years, and list what like a dream appears a medley in the night. This day East Hampton's freemen's meet, and by East Hampton's patent sheet their sires were bound to do. Erect and unafraid they come, from modest, proud, or humble home. No man can say them no. From Springs and Kingstown through the sand, East Side, Orange Hole, Stony Hill, Montauk, Napeague, and Promised Land, Fresh Pond, the Scrubs, and the Whippoorwill, and the Amagansett Whalemen come, Skimhampton Road, Further Lane, and every man whose home is twixt Littleford and Eastern Plain, from Fireplace, Duck Creek, Head Harbor, Round Swamp, Freetown, and Northwest Plains, Hardscrabble, Toilsome, Gingerbread, Race, Buell Woods, and Newtown Lane, Sag Harbor and its ships ahoy, and Northwest Creek and Powder Hill, the hollow of the Whooping Boy. From Wainscott, Buckskill, and the Creeks, from Appoquog and Jericho, from Lazy Point and Nominix, Georgica, Egypt, and Pantago, from Cedar Point and Ellie Brook, Hand Creek, Soakides, and Sammy's Beach, from Accabonac and the Hook, from every place in sound or reach. If not too rough to keep afloat, there surely comes the island boat. They all foregather in the street, old times recalled, old comrades greet, old shipmates from sea, till in the old academy. Squire Tedhill stands in dignity and thrice calls out, "Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye." And that these freemen gather round and move in second at a sound. They often argue, sometimes fight. Some always disagree, but still in all, or wrong or right, they are one family. So I thought that was a great way to start it out. And Bill, what do we got?
I want to join Jimmy in welcoming you all here, and the fact that it took Jimmy 60 years to go 2 blocks should not be held against him. I want to thank Barbara Borsack and the Society for having the two of us. Truth be told about the selection process, Richard Barons has spoken, Bob Hefner has spoken. Upcoming, you have Hugh R. King, Ken Cullum, and a cast of 10, I believe, is coming up. And when they got to places, they realized they had nobody left to do places. So the executive decision, I think, was for 2 nobodies to do places. And we are amateur historians. Jimmy by birth, as he bragged, mine less honorably. I remember as a junior in high school, my dad asked me what I hoped to major in college, and I said history, and he said simply, no. So we have some fact, we have some research, we have some revisionism, and some folklore all coming your way tonight. And I think, Jimmy?
The Springs, Billy? First place name we're going to do, I think, Bill, you want to show them where Springs is or thereabouts? There we go. Springs, or The Springs, a peninsula north of East Hampton Village, noted for its freshwater springs and excellent harbors, pasture, forest, and fishing grounds. The entree port for Gardiner's Island. The name may have originated with a land allotment at Accabonac Meadow drawn by William Barnes in 1670. The original settlers were the Chatfields, the Hands, the Bakers, the Millers, and Bennetts. Until the 20th century, Springs was, for any Long Islander, a remote area with a small population of self-sufficient farmers and fishermen.
And there's a lot of places in the Springs, and some of the names have sort of moved around a little bit. It was originally known as Accabonac Neck, and Accabonac, some think, came from a word called saga, which refers to roots, tuber bulbs, or ground nuts, and it was a place of great abundance. So the Springs people were self-sufficient, and there was that idea that they were a little bit fishers and gatherers as well. Ashawag, there's an early spelling, Ashawak, and Tooker believes it means the land, in Indian, the land between the branches of creeks. Ashawag Hall was built in 1807 as a school. Barnes Landing, named for a 17th century family of settlers from Norfolk. Bostwick, it's not simply a fish restaurant, but it's the harbor bay and creek on Gardeners, and it was named for one of the early overseers. Jimmy, do you have...
Well, I'd like to get back to Accabonac there for a second, Willie. All right? It's where the term Bonnet is in your Bonnet country, or he spoke Bonnet, meaning the local way of speech, comes from the earlier days the harbor was often referred to as Bonnet Creek. Accabonac is also the source of Bonacar in He's-a-Bonacar, which today is understood to mean East Hampton native. In past years, though, Bonacar was someone who worked the harbor's waters for fish and shellfish. In the old days, the name was also used to distinguish plain, working people from upstreeters, those who lived in the village and wore fancy clothes. In 1873, a map of Springs, the name was spelled Accabonac. The names of the hamlet Springs, incidentally, refers to, again, the fresh waters and head of that harbor.
And I think to some, the term Bonacar was a pejorative, and it's become sort of the red badge of courage for the town of East Hampton, and the original Bonacar is up at the Springs Fire Department. Jimmy, anything more?
Yeah, Accabonac, actually, Billy. You can't think of it after this past winter, but in the old days, in the wintertime, the ice was cut out of the harbor to pack local fishermen's catches for transport to Fulton Fish Market. Accabonac has excellent clamming beds and fishing areas. But I can't imagine cutting ice, because there must have been a very cold winters in those days. They cut ice.
And just where by Ashawag Hall, there were fields out into the harbor where they grazed cattle as well. So it was a well-used place, very fertile. My turn. Copices. Tooker thinks it's an Algonquin word for a small harbor. Dayton Island. The original name was born in 1588 in England, died in East Hampton in 1658. Daniel Dayton was a captain in the War of 1812. Charles Bolivar Dayton was a surgeon with the 127th New York Volunteers, and he lived in the 1770 house. Jimmy, didn't you used to clam?
As some of you know, recently the island was known as Keys Island. And I don't like to give away spots, but there is clamming over or near the area. A long way away, but don't listen to them, all right? Now, Cliffy Keys got very indignant with me this summer because I was over in his large area and I was digging clams. And he says, you shouldn't be over here. I said, don't you remember, Cliffy? We paid $3 million for these clams.
Duck Creek. It's a well-dredged harbor now, but it was a creek, and it houses the Maidstone Marina. Flaggy Hole. Flaggy means a place where rushes grow. Don't ask me what a rush is. Jimmy, do you want to do rushes?
No, I got enough problems.
Right. Gardeners. The Gardeners, the first child of English parentage born in New York, they think in 1640. Originally, the Gardeners called it the Isle of Wight. And we'll touch back on Gardeners a few times. But the Indian word for it was, then there's a few, but one was Manchanaki. And in Indian, it meant place where many have died. And I know that when the sachem's daughter was about to be married, she was kidnapped, so there was a lot of sea traffic coming from tribes, the Narragansetts perhaps, and the Pequots up in Connecticut, and I guess Gardiner's Island must have been a special place. I have been on Gardiner's once, and I was chased off. We did escape, but we saw a bald eagle. This was about 25 years ago. It was really quite an incredible place before the bald eagles had come back to the mainland here. Louse Point, right near Tick Island, I think, isn't it, Jimmy?
Might be Hicks, but that's all right.
This might be folklore or revisionism, but it is said that a fisherman from Connecticut claimed he came there to fish, and there wasn't enough fish there to feed a louse. And that is a small wingless parasite. Merrill Lake. I know you all drive by the Merrill Lake Sanctuary on Fireplace Road. Are you looking for the lake? I was always looking for the lake. Turns out it was named after Merrill Miller Lake, who donated the land to the Nature Conservancy. So tell people to keep looking for that lake. With global warming, we may get it at some point here. Soakides, which is an area down at the bottom of Dahaba, and that area was also known as Tan Bark Creek, and apparently there were 3 tanning creeks in the town of East Hampton. At Little Northwest Creek, which, let me see if I can find that. I think that is here. And then there was one also at Georgica by the creek. So one of these arms, I'm not sure which one it was. But I do remember when the rains came a couple of years ago, in April, I drove down Stevenhands Path, and there was a stream 3 feet wide running to Georgica. So there's been so much change, it's hard to realize how things have changed so much. Springy Banks, we think that's way too obvious. We shouldn't do it. 3 Mile Harbor, now that's part of a quiz, I believe, isn't it, Jimmy?
Well, Bill, maybe you can answer that question for me. Is it 3 miles along the harbor, or is it 3 miles from the village?
Is there a Mendelman here?
Anybody answer that?
Anybody want to answer that? I think we'll wait.
We got a man up here of great authority, Bob Osborne, says it's both, so case closed.
So we're trying to be a little bit geographically oriented, so we're going to head out to Northwest and Sag Harbor, and the wonderfully termed Barcelona, which on this map is shown as Russell's Neck, and that is because John Russell purchased 190 acres in 1776 for the whopping sum of 250 pounds. Now, I think Huey could probably tell me what a teacher made in 1776. Might be 8 pounds a year or 10 pounds a year, I don't know, but 250 pounds doesn't sound like a lot, but I think it was a tremendous amount of money. But also the term Barcelona came for the high bluffs, which, as the whalers returned from their long journeys, reminded them of those bluffs surrounding the Catalan city of Barcelona. And as they came in, they felt good about coming in, and somehow that name has stuck, and it is one of the greatest places for passing highways. And if you're taking a walk, it's a wonderful place. Down in Sag Harbor, there's a little road called Eastville, but the area is also known as Eastville, and that area was originally known as Snooksville, which I'm sure the residents asked to be changed as they grew up. Eastville was settled by free slaves and runaways, and individuals by the name of David Hempstead, which perhaps the street was named after, Lewis Cuffey, Charles Plato, and William Prime were the founders of St. David's African Methodist Episcopal Church. Also in Northwest is the wonderfully named Hardscrabble, which is right here by Stevenhands Path. And generally, to me, Hardscrabble always means something place that wasn't fertile, where you really couldn't make much out of it. But there is some attribution to a terse epithet to the poor people who lived there by Stevenhands Path. So a hard scrabbled existence still exists in our vernacular. Jason's Rock, which is still there if you're hiking the trail system of the town of East Hampton. It's in the Bull Path area. It's a glacial erratic boulder. It's huge, and it caught rainwater in its hollow top. An Indian named Jason would rest and take water on his way to Sag Harbor. Lafarge's Landing. Now, how am I going to do this here? That is sort of up in this area here. It's at the end of Old House Road, north of Sammy's Beach, and it was owned by a man named H. Lafarge. Now here I'm going to pose a question, because you see West Harbor here, and you see Cedar Point, and this area was called Northwest Harbor. Now, generally in history, a harbor has a mouth narrower than the body of it, and it is a place for protection, a safe harbor. But why is it called a harbor? Because you can take a boat and pass through and go past North Haven, which is where you take the South Ferry. Well, in the old days, in the trustee records, they used to drive herds of sheep and cattle across the sandbar that connected North Haven with Shelter Island. And so that's why it was a harbor. And that's probably why the Peconic all drained out at Greenport, and they talk about the depth of Greenport Harbor at 96 feet, and that's because the entire Peconic system drained out through there. But once the overwash started at the sandbar, it just self-dredged, so it's not coming back. You won't be walking. But that's why Northwest Harbor is called Northwest Harbor. And Samus Beach, sometimes called Sammy's Beach, there are two thoughts on this. Samus was an old family, and they think the era was compounded by mat makers, and others say, and that's S-A-M-M-I-S, and sometimes you see that, and others say it was first owned by Samuel and Robert Parsons, although nobody calls it Robert's Beach, so I'm not sure about that. Scoy's Pond. I don't know if this might be Scoy's Pond. I'm not quite sure. I can't see. Okay. Scoy's Pond is from the Dutch Van Scott, Van Scoyac, A-C-K, and Isaac Van Scoy settled in this primal forest in 1757, and he married Mary Edwards and raised 15 children, and this was long before the Whelans and the Consulates followed suit. And last but not least, it's a street, but I thought it's interesting because Union Street, and you think of all the people up here who fought in the Civil War, but it is not a Civil War, meaning it affects the union between the Bridgehampton Turnpike and Division Street, which is the thing. And that, and I somehow have, did I walk right past Division Street? I may have. And Division Street was the line created in 1695 by an agreement. Each town created a street 1 rod wide on each side of the division. And if anybody, does anybody know how long a rod is? 16 and a half feet. And if you look around, you'll see 2 rod and 6 rod. And so a rod is 16 and a half feet, and every attorney in town knows that New York state law requires you to have a street 3 rods wide to be there. And so they make it 50 feet to be sure that they get the extra half foot. So that's it for me in Sag Harbor. And we're going to get down to these up-street, down-street people.
Coming back to the upstreeters.
The upstreeters, and maybe we'll find out why you guys never went below the bridge.
I never went below the bridge because there were people named Loper, Cotter, Webb, Reaney, and they used to beat us up and send us home. So it was much safer to stay up in this area. There was a lot of them. Back up in the village here, Billy. This is a little, we said we were going to do some fact, some fiction. So I have a little fiction woven in with some facts, and I think you're going to find this fact if some of you don't know it. just mind-boggling. I'm going to call it the Summer White House. John Tyler married Julia Gardner from East Hampton. John Tyler at the time was President of the United States. He was president in 1841. He took over after William Harrison died in office. Actually, John Tyler was born 221 years ago. Huey pointed out to me that it was probably never a summer White House, that he never came here during the summers, and he might have come here a summer after he left the presidency. But he had a remarkable lineage, and I'd like to just go through it with you just for a second. He still has 2 living grandchildren alive. Now listen to what I'm saying. 2 living grandchildren alive. John Tyler's grandchildren. Now, how is this possible? Well, it seems like Tyler and Tyler men used to like to father things later in life. I'm going to try to run through it and bring you up to date.
Is he running again?
He's in the primary. John Tyler, well, follow me along here, because this gets confused with all the Tylers and Tyler Jr. and this and that, but just follow along. John Tyler was born in 1790. He became the 10th president of the United States in 1841. Tyler fathered Lyon Gardner Tyler in 1853, and he was 63 at that time. Now, his son, at the age of 71, Lyon Gardner Tyler fathered Lyon Gardner Tyler Jr. And in 1924, 4 years later, at age 75, he fathered Harrison Ruffin Tyler. And both these men are still alive today. Now, can you imagine sitting around a table? Your grandfather's sitting there, and you'd say to the grandchildren are sitting there, and they'd say, well, what war did your dad fight in? Well, he was back in the Civil War. Oh, yeah? How about your grandfather? Oh, he was born when Washington was in office. It's just mind-boggling. And I don't know if any of you realize this, but one of John Tyler's sons is buried in South End Cemetery. John Tyler is the only president whose death is not officially mourned, because after he left the presidency, he ended up joining the Confederacy and served in their House of Representatives. And both of his sons served in the Confederate Army. So that's a little bit about the summer White House. Georgia, Billy, got a little thing on Georgia? You want me to take it?
That's you.
Okay. Georgia is a common place name in East Hampton. Georgia Beach, Cove, Georgia Road. We all think of Georgia. Where did the name originate? I like this version best, so I'm going to give you the version I like best, okay? We think it originated with an Indian named Cherokee. And the spelling of the Indian's name was Jeorgkee. And Cherokee, as an Indian, spent a lot of time in that area, and he was always on the lookout for whales. As a matter of fact, in 1679, Cherokee was one of several men who signed on the crew as a ship owner with Jacob Skellinger, and the agreement notes that these men went to sea to kill whales. In the earliest mention of East Hampton town records, Georgica was June 1652. Throughout the years, the spelling appears in various ways, and it starts sometimes with a G, sometimes with a J, so Georgica gets spelled a lot of different ways. In June 1660, it was ordered that every man shall take his turn to watch the beach at Georgica, presumably for whales. till it hath gone one round, and whoever shall neglect his turn shall have to pay. So they were always on the lookout for whales. This brackish pond was full of eels and fish and attracted many shorebirds. Today it attracts wealthy homeowners. The Georgica Association was a private neighborhood on the Wainscott side of the pond and its first summer colony in the hamlet, and it was established in 1880 and incorporated in 1892. It once had a small golf course, which was used by the Maidstone Club members on Sundays when they were forbidden to play on their own links. So those Maidstone guys used to sneak over to Georgica Association. That was bad, huh, Bill?
There goes the neighborhood, you know. Let me give you some other East Hampton, or you got more?
How about Appoquog?
You got it. That's definitely yours.
Appoquog Road in East Hampton begins where Lily Pond Lane ends near Georgica Beach. Appoquog means that general area around Lily Pond, and today it's a neighborhood, again, of high-valued homes. But in earlier centuries, it was a farming country where locals took in summer boarders. Appoquog, Appoquig are various spellings. The name is found not only in Long Island, but also in Connecticut among the Indians. It means a place where flags grow. Anybody want to guess what flags were? They were cattails. Flags were cattails. And the Native Americans used these cattails to cover their wigwams. So that's what the Appoquog, that area, I guess it's all been invaded by those Phragmites today. And I don't even know whether there are any cattails today. Maybe some of you do. But Pudding Hill. Well, everybody knows the story of Pudding Hill. I mean, it's located here in the village, right over this way, as a matter of fact. This was named after a Revolutionary War incident. It seems that a mistress had just been done baking her berry plum pudding, and she put it out on her windowsill to cool. As luck would have it, there were British soldiers scavenging in the area for food. She looked out, saw what was happening, and quickly threw her beautiful pudding down the hill. Thus, Pudding Hill. Freetown. Freetown, actually, Bill, it's up there on the map, right? It's an area where Freetown, see Freetown? An area in East Hampton Village north of the railroad tracks, segmented by 3 Mile Harbor Road, Springs, Fireplace Road, and Hands Creek Road. This settlement was once an enclave of freed slaves and Montauk Indians. Slaves in New York State were given their freedom in 1799 by the state legislature. And it was deemed on July 4th, 1799, all males 27 years old would be, as they attained the age of 27, they'd be freed, and women at the age of 25.
Obvious discrimination.
Yeah. Reverse. Something that I came upon that I had never really realized, at one time Gardiner's Island Plantation was mostly worked by slave labor, and there were only over 200 slaves on Gardiner's Island itself. So.
And in Freetown, in 1879, after the Benson purchase of Montauk was completed, many of the Montaukets moved there. Freetown is not an area of inherited wealth, I can assure you. Baiting Hollow is another East Hampton town name, and baiting is Old English meaning feeding and eating, and so we think that Baiting Hollow is a place where livestock grazed. Great Plain, and this takes into account Appoquog. Great Plain was in the village in the land south of Appoquog Sandhills, from Hook Pond to Lily Pond. And can you imagine the long farmland vistas there before? I mean, if you look at the way the allotments were laid out. Herrick Park was the gift of James B. Ford in memory of his sister, Harriet F. Herrick. in 1917. She was the wife of Dr. Everett Herrick, a founder of the Maidstone Club. And here's one that we drive by every day with the romantic name of Loam Hole. And Loam Hole still exists as open space. It's the area south of Montauk Highway, bounded on the southwest by Buckskill and the southeast by Baiting Hollow Road, and that's that triangle. And Jimmy has some...
Anybody know what that triangle is called today that he has just described? Bannister Park, named after the first mayor in East Hampton, Judson L. Bannister. And it's really kind of lovely through there if you want to walk through. I know the LVIS has many plaques of trees and stuff in there. I know because my wife's made me go in there and look for them. Billy?
When Jimmy and I were doing our research, we asked a number of questions of Hugh Art King, and he told us whenever we were stumped, if you ask us a question, we are going to answer Richard Barron's as the key to it. And I was going through some of my presentation, and I discussed the idea of Maidstone, which is a town in Kent, which we all know was this area to a certain extent. And there are stories that St. Luke and perhaps the library were both modeled after a church and library in this town. And Richard kind of went, well, Bill, the church may be okay, but I'm just going to still relay the library, because if you walk by, there's some nice old timber design in that library, and so it's an interesting aspect of it. Pantago. Now, isn't that down street, Jimmy?
Oh, Pantago, no, not Pantago, those were the Lesters were.
Did you get beat up there, too?
No, I went to my grandmother's house there.
So you had safe passage. Yes, okay. Well, you know, this is one of the great ones of revisionism and folklore. It's an area between East Hampton, and the word first appeared in 1669 when William Edwards gave his daughter land at Pantago. Tooker and Henry P. Hedges in East Hampton, Henry P. Hedges, an East Hampton historian, say it evolved from Pant-I-Go, based on a local happening. Richard would not give that his imprimatur either, I can assure you. Wyborg's Beach, which what I first learned of it as Pink Beach because of the Pink House, which was only taken down about a year ago.
That's why he's been here 32 years.
But I also knew it as Robert Montgomery Beach, the wonderful actor who lived in Pink House, but it is named after the Wyborg family, which had a large, Frank Wyborg was from 1855 to 1930, and he had 80 acres of land there, and his daughter Sarah married the Murphy, and they were friends of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and the last of the relations are still there and own a small house along the beach. So then we go to Amagansett, Jimmy, and you want to start?
You're the Amagansett man.
Okay. And it was very interesting in the research that Amagansett was not settled by the Indians. It is known in Algonquin as a place of good water, and the Indians did not live there. They would pass through there and fish, and using the water at Indian Wells and the other places, and the whites settled in about 1680. Because the Indians didn't live there, some people think this was the beginning of the tradition started by the Algonquins of the Amagansett NIMBYism, not in my backyard.
You see what I mean about the words?
Richard did not go for that one either, I can assure you. Devon is an English town. Fort Tyler, named after Julia Tyler Gardner, who married the Prez, as Jimmy said, was built in 1898. It protected the northern end of Gardner's Island, and later became known as the Ruins, and fishermen will talk about out fishing by the Ruins. And the Ruins were used for practice bombing by Grumman during World War II. The planes would come right out and hit that area. The Glades. The Glades are an area between Bluff Road and the Dunes. Miss Amelia's cottage. Amelia Skellinger lived from 1841 to 1930. She spelled her name with all E's. She is a descendant of Jacob Skellinger, who used an I. I'm still not sure how to spell it, and when you look at surveys and deeds, you get it going back and forth. It's much like we have Bob Osborne here, who's an East Hampton Osborne, because the Wainscott Osbornes eschewed the E at the end of their name. So that's how you can tell where they're from, I think, a little bit, Bob, right? Napeague, Jimmy?
Yeah, Napeague. It's that sandy isthmus that connects Amagansett with Montauk. The Native American origins record this like word by ear. Everett T. Rattray, the South Fork, writes the Napeague means waterland. In East Hampton, A History and Guide by Jason Epstein and Elizabeth DeBarrow, it is said to mean land overflowed by water. Both are fitting. Napeague is bordered by the Atlantic on the south and Napeague Harbor on the north, and during the 1938 hurricane, it became one large body of water.
And the early Dutch maps showed that water passed through. A 17th century Dutch navigational map showed the water moving right through before the sand had accreted there.
Napeague has never escaped the notice of Hollywood. Much of The Sheik, the movie The Sheik, starring Rudolph Valentino, was filmed there during the summer of 1922. So he wasn't really in the Africa in those sand dunes. He was down there in the walking dunes. Most recently, part of the DreamWorks thriller Deep Impact was set on the South Fork's sandland there.
Got any more on Napeague?
No, I'm out of it on Napeague.
Okay, I guess we're going to head out to go on to...
How about Hicks Island? Hicks Island's a favorite of mine.
Oh, that's still Napeague.
Hicks Island, near Lazy Point or Goff Point on Napeague, takes its name from an old South Fork family that has now died out. The island, uninhabited except by piping plover, terns, and some gulls and occasional predatory fox, was in earlier days the site of at least one fish factory. A water main extended from a pumping station at Fresh Pond in Montauk to Skunk Hole across the beach under Napeague Harbor and to the island remnants, and these remnants of this foundation of this promised land can be seen today over there, or this fish factory. Originally from Gloucester in England, the Hicks were said to have been Quakers, came to America in the early 17th century, and to East Hampton in 1720. That would have been, 1720 would have been Joseph Hicks, who generally thought to have been the original owner of the land in East Hampton Village, formerly called Hicks Street, which is now Gould Street. Today, Hicks Island is part of Napeague State Park. Hicks Island has fond memories for myself because my grandfather had a camp at Lazy Point, and Hicks Island is right across the way. And in 1954, we had a very serious hurricane here, and I, as a little boy, went with my father and my grandfather as we rode across to Hicks Island to pick up our outhouse that had floated across. I assure you, we brought it back and returned it to its proper foundation.
I hate it when you brag, Jimmy. Anything more? Except
Oh, no, that's it. That's it.
I guess we'll go on to Montauk and...
A little bit, Bill, then we're going to have to do a quiz.
Okay. We'll try and move this along. Amsterdam is a place in Montauk. It's named after the 1867 wreck of a steamer. Benson Point, named after Arthur W. Benson, who in 1879 was the sole owner of Montauk. In 1895, the railroad track was extended to Fort Pond to be a port for transatlantic steamers. Another idea that didn't quite come to fruition, but the thought is that since the steamer took longer than the railroad, if you put this port out there that they would come in, but the people weren't quite sure to do that, I think. There's Culloden, but
Probably
that's part
a petition outlawed it, right?
That's right. That's right. The place called Dead Man's Cove, which is off Ditch Plains. It's a tradition that bodies of Shinnecox washed ashore after trying to save the ship Circassian in Southampton town. Ditch Plains, and here's something that has evolved because of Mr. Benson, but Ditch Plains was the outlet from the Lake Montauk to the ocean before the developer Arthur Benson opened the lake at the north end. And there's still discussions of keeping the water movement down through Ditch Plains. Loper's Field puts fear in Jimmy's heart. And they must have looked at it in the same way. This was defined as a fattening field near Third House. Loper is a Dutch name. And I'm not precisely sure where Loper's Field is. We don't have the map. Montauk was called, the Dutch called it Fisher's Hook in a 1655 map. The Indian deed refers to Menatacut, Menatacut, meaning highland, or one of many variants. Tooker thought the word referred to a fort or fortified place, which isn't that different from a highland. Montauk Downs. It's not a golf course.
Yes, it is.
It's a place for grazing. And Navy Road, I was never quite sure, and if you go out and cross the tracks there by Fort Pond, oh, there we are. We have moved out here. When you cross the tracks here by Fort Pond, you can see where the railroad is. And Navy Road is still the cement structures that were built in World War II for the seaplanes that were using it. I'm pretty much at the end of mine, although I know Ken Westberg's here and he told me he knows what gingerbread lane means, but I think we'll have to save that for another day.
We probably will.
We probably will.
Mr. Barron, have you come across the meaning of gingerbread lane yet?
Not really.
Not really.
I think that's Ken's answer too, actually. And
Bill, it's time for a quiz.
well, I want to acknowledge Ken. He's a dignitary and he's my landlord. And if anybody thinks my building needs a good coat of paint, could you raise your hand, please? Okay. So,
Wow, okay.
now the quiz.
Okay. Now, I'm going to read a definition. And I tried to keep these simple. So if anybody in the audience thinks within 5 or 6 seconds they know the answer before I have to give it, just give it to me. All right? This is a swamp located between Fresh Pond and Abrams Landing Road. Origins of its name are unknown. A swamp with a funny name. Belly Ache Swamp. Is that Harriet? Are you hang out there or what? All right, very good, very good.
Good audience here, boy.
All right. Okay, you ready? Located on the south side of Abrams Landing Road, Amagansett, north of the Long Island Railroad tracks, bunkers that the Indians called Menhagadin or something like that, were used to fertilize this ground. What's the name where this ground was fertilized by bunker? Bunker Hill. Very good. We're on top of it now. A barrier between Northwest Harbor and Gardner's Bay, now part of a county park. Cedar Point. Cedar Point. Even my wife got that one. Oh, no, that was good. I thought that was good. She's heard the quiz 22 times now. So, yeah.
This is why they waited the extra 2 years to free the men.
A point of land on the northeast side of Fort Pond Bay, named for a British warship wrecked there in 1781. Culloden Point, okay. An Indian stockade stood here, south of Montauk Manor, overlooking Fort Pond.
Fort Hill?
Fort Hill, very good. Who was that? That was good. Wow. Bill, you are going to get that fresh coat of paint.
Got a lobby.
Here we are, here we go. A freshwater pond in the village between Dunemere Lane and Ocean Beach. Hook Pond. Hook Pond. Here's the one I really like. This is the land that the Montauk Lighthouse is built on. Turtle Hill. Good. Used for signaling between the mainland and Gardiner's Island. Old Fireplace Landing. Located north of Cedar Bush, where the Smith Mill fish processing plant is located on the shores of the Nappig Bay. Promised Land.
And there's a few stories about Promised Land, aren't there, Jimmy?
Oh, all I remember is when we had baseball practice out on the field in the spring, when they were cooking them bunkers, boy, it was rotten out there. It really smelled. Could smell it all through the village.
So, some think that Promised Land came as its name because it had no promise at all, much like a hard scrabble place. And Richard advised us that an old fisherman said that it was called Promised Land because they promised to pay him for his fish, but they never did.
A large body of water separating Ely Brook and Accabonac Neck. 3 Mile Harbor. Bill, I've stumped them good tonight, I can tell. We have something we're going to hand out to you. I hope there's enough light that you can all see it, or maybe Richard can turn this on. You're going to get a handout, and you're going to get to follow along with Bill and I through this handout. Okay, if everybody calms down, I'm going to start it out and see if you can follow Bill and I along. Hiya, Mac.
Hello, buddy.
Been here long?
Couple lures.
Catching any?
Got a few.
Kind are they?
Bass and the carp.
Any size to them?
Couple of poons.
Hitting hard?
Sort of like.
What's you been using?
Gob of worms.
Fishing on the bottom?
Right on the bottom.
What you been drinking?
Jug of Jim Beam.
I gotta go.
Too bad.
See you around.
Yeah, take it easy.
Good luck. Thank you.
At the end? Is that the end?
Yeah.
I think I want to clarify one thing before I let you all go, because Jim likes to talk about being an up-streeter. I'm a down-streeter, and I've always lived down street, but I've always lived on the south side of the railroad tracks.
Damn.
So thank you very much.
Very
See you all in April. Thanks for coming.